Lui sta in mezzo ai cavalli. Qual è quella macchina in mezzo? Luca?
Grazie, non ti coprono, grazie.
Buongiorno, come stai?
Bene.
Ciao Fra.
Non è andata male.
Dei doni, il Santo Padre donerà al Presidente il mosaico durante il Colosseo, opera dello studio del mosaico vaticano, una copia autografata della prima esortazione apostolica di
Ti puoi allargare tu? Ti puoi allargare adesso? Ti puoi allargare adesso? Allargati, puoi allargare. Appena passano loro ti allarghi, ti metti qui centrale con la telecamera.
Il Presidente presenterà al Papa i suoi consiglieri e poi ci sarà una breve sosta nella cappella dell'Annunziata dove ad attendere il Papa ci saranno
these. Speaking more about the Bronzino room, which we see Pope Leo admiring, these series of 20 tapestries, 10 of them are still kept in Florence, and the rest were taken to Rome in 1882 to embellish the Savoy dynasty's royal palace. At present, there are 10 tapestries in the Quirinal Palace, and they're displayed in this hall according to a rotating system. Not all of them are currently hanging on the walls. This room hosts the meetings of the Italian President of the Republic with invited heads of state and their delegations. The hall was once known as the Dark Room because the windows do not directly open onto the exterior, but onto the Hall of Battles, which was so called because it was decorated with several paintings dedicated to Renaissance victories. The painting on the vault portraying an allegorical celebration of Italy dates back to the reign of the House of Savoy, which was at the beginning of the 20th century. And as Pope Leo and President Mattarella begin their private talks, we can recall perhaps a little bit of the history of the papal ownership and use of the Quirinal Palace. This used to be a papal residence. As we know, the central portion of Italy was called the Papal States and was under papal control for its temporal governance throughout the Middle Ages, late Middle Ages, and up until 1860, and then the final fall of the city of Rome, and the completion of the creation of the Italian state in 1871. And jumping back to 1583, Pope Gregory XIII began construction of the Quirinal Palace as a summer residence for the popes. The Pope was seeking a healthier, breezier location than the Vatican, which at the time was prone to malaria from the Tiber marshes. This was before the Tiber River was bona fide and cleaned up in modern times. And so after Pope Gregory XIII built the Quirinal Palace, successive popes expanded it, especially Sixtus V, who also carried out extensive work on the city of Rome and was instrumental in giving the center part of Rome its modern layout. Clement VIII and Paul V also worked on the Quirinal Palace, turning it into one of Europe's greatest and grandest royal residences. And then for nearly 3 centuries, from 1583 until 1870, it served as the principal papal residence. So before the popes at the time did not reside solely in the Vatican, but lived here at the Quirinal Palace up until 1870. And it was the site of many consistories, papal receptions, and conclaves. The end of the papal control of the Papal States and the papal control of Rome, temporal control, came in 1870 whenever the Kingdom of Italy annexed Rome and ended the Papal States. Italian troops at the time occupied the Quirinal Palace, and King Victor Emmanuel II took it as his official royal palace. We note that several famous Italian architects of the Baroque and later periods provided important inputs into the Quirinal Palace, including Carlo Maderno, who refined the facades and the courtyards. Gian Lorenzo Bernini touched the setting with a theatrical sense that defined Baroque Rome. And by the 1600s and the 1700s, the Quirinal Palace had become the Pope's principal home, as we said. It was a sort of working court where consistories met, ambassadors were received, and the rhythms of papal governance played out in its frescoed halls and formal gardens. The Quirinal Palace can be visited by appointment, but they offer a full tour and goes through most of the modern history of the Quirinal Palace, and you get to see the beautiful grounds and gardens surrounding this large residence in the very heart and center of Rome. The palace weathered the Napoleonic shock, so whenever Napoleon, the French Emperor Napoleon, came and took Rome, there was produced quite a shock at the turn of the 19th century, so the early 1800s. Napoleon even imagined it as an imperial residence, but then it returned to papal use with the Restoration. And throughout much of the 19th century, the Quirinal Palace remained the beating heart of the papal household. And at the time, the Vatican complex, the Vatican city-state and the area surrounding it, increasingly housed curial offices and large ceremonial spaces. As I mentioned, the situation changed in 1870 after Italian troops entered Rome at what is known as the breach of Porta Pia, the Pious Gates. At that time, the Papal States collapsed, and King Victor Emmanuel II claimed the palace for the Italian monarchy's Roman palace. The popes at the time refused to recognize the new political order and withdrew across the river to the Vatican, here surrounding St. Peter's Basilica, and at the time they styled themselves as prisoners of the Vatican. From that time, whenever a pope was elected to the papacy, he would never again leave the Vatican, because he was as they styled themselves as I said, prisoners of the Vatican, and were prevented from traveling internationally, traveling abroad, traveling into Italy, because the Vatican was no longer a sovereign state. And then this situation ended with the Lateran Pacts of 1929, and these pacts, which were signed by Cardinal Gasparri in the name of Pope Pius XI, were and King Victor Emmanuel III gave the Vatican City its own independence and sovereignty, and it created the independent Vatican City and settled the status of major properties. There are several properties across Rome that are known as extraterritorial and are part of the Vatican City-State, even though their footprint lies in Italian territory. So these agreements affirmed that the Quirinal belonged to Italy. It was still the royal residence, and then when Italy became a republic, became the residence of Italian presidents. And the Holy See's sovereignty under the Lateran Pacts was exercised within Vatican City and across these extraterritorial basilicas and buildings. And so after the Second World War, the Italian monarchy fell in 1946, and Italy was created as a republic. At that time, the Quirinal Palace took on its modern role as the residence of the presidents. And today, the Quirinal, as we see, is the working head of state palace, where the president meets with foreign dignitaries and heads of state. Pope Leo is currently meeting in the Quirinal Palace in the Bronzino room for private talks with President Sergio Mattarella. At the same time, the two sovereign states delegations are meeting in a separate room for bilateral talks. Since the Lateran Treaty in 1929, Italy and the Holy See have maintained good relations, and all kings and presidents afterwards and the popes have sought to keep up that good relationship, which has been very visible lately over this past year and the last few months after the death of Pope Francis and the conclave that followed that elected Pope Leo, and then the various engagements surrounding the Jubilee Year of Hope. We've seen the efficiency and the excellent organization of the Italian civil authorities, which have kept the security tight here around the Vatican and facilitated the arrival of pilgrims and many other visitors to the city of Rome, brought here by the Jubilee, and then by those major papal events that have marked the life of the Church. Keeping up the discussion of the Lateran Treaty, which really gave birth to the modern form of relations between Italy and the Vatican, so with the popes. We recall that it wasn't long after the Lateran Pacts, in fact it was 2 years later, when Pope Pius XI asked Guglielmo Marconi to set up the Vatican radio. Marconi had recently invented, he had a couple of decades earlier, but had invented the radio as a form of communication. And with the Vatican's new sovereignty, the Pope was able to set up a radio station in coordination with the Italian authorities and other European authorities to create his own radio station, to give voice and to bring a mouthpiece to the Holy Father, from being a prisoner of the Vatican as they were known before, to speak to the world. And Vatican Radio succeeded in broadcasting the Pope's voice to the world through its many shortwave broadcasting stations, first locally and then expanding its footprint throughout the globe. And all of this was a result of the Lateran Treaty. As part of the Lateran Pacts, that ended 60 years of standoff between the Italian authorities and the popes. There were several different components. One of them was the recognition of sovereignty, and at the same time there was also a recognition that of the financial loss that the Holy See had underwent due to the fall of the Papal States. And so Italy agreed in one of the treaties to pay the Holy See a 750 million lire, which was the Italian currency of the time, in cash, and as well as 1 billion lire in government bonds as compensation for that loss of the Papal States that had happened 60 years earlier. The Holy See at the same time recognized the Kingdom of Italy, with Rome as its capital, and it reaffirmed the Holy See's right to send and receive ambassadors, which the Holy See calls nuncios, apostolic nuncios, to foreign nations. We recall that there are different ways of referring to the Vatican and the Holy See, that being the Holy See, Vatican City State, and the Holy See. They represent two different aspects of the same entity. So the Vatican City is a sovereign, independent microstate that's under papal authority. So it's really the land and the buildings connected to it that make up the Vatican City. At the same time, the Lateran Pacts reaffirmed the Holy See as an international personality. And so when we speak of the Holy See, when we speak of the Roman Curia and the Holy See, these are all parts of the Holy See, which is the international authority that extend the Pope's voice and reach and his magisterium throughout the world. And so whenever we talk about apostolic nuncios or the various delegations that will go to the United Nations to speak, where the Holy See has a permanent representation, these are aspects of the Holy See and not the Vatican City in its own as a sovereign state, but on a more global stage as the central governing body of the Catholic Church. Through the Concordat, which was part of the Lateran Pacts, this Concordat defined the relationship between the Catholic Church and the Italian state. One of the results at the time was that Catholicism became the state religion of Italy, and it was recognized as the only religion of the Italian state. This lasted until 1984, whenever the Concordat was modified to make Italy a state that is a secular state that does not recognize the single right of any religion and frees the freedom of religion and guarantees it for all citizens. The Concordat also granted Catholic religious marriage and the sacramental marriage as it was granted civil recognition. It's still possible in Italy today to get married in a Catholic church and with a Catholic priest and receive full recognition at the same time on a civil level of that marriage, so through the Italian state. At the same time, religious instruction became mandatory in public schools. That was part of Catholicism becoming Italy's state religion. Clerics were given certain privileges. They were, for example, exempted from military service, which was mandatory at the time. Bishops were allowed to swear loyalty to the state, and the church retained the right to manage seminaries, parishes, and religious orders freely without government intervention. And ecclesial institutions regained legal personality and protection of church property. The Concordat was revised in 1984 through the Villa Madama agreement. This, which is officially called the 1984 revision of the Lateran Concordat, was a new treaty between the Holy See and the Italian Republic. It was signed on February 18th, 1984 at Villa Madama in Rome. Just to note, this Villa Madama agreement did not replace the 1929 Lateran Treaty, but it revised as I said, the Concordat, which governed relations between the Catholic Church and the Italian state. This updating of the Concordat reflected the profound political and cultural changes that had taken place in Italy since 1929. These included the fall of fascism, the creation of a democratic republic in 1946, and the increasing pluralism and secularization of Italian society. After World War II, the Italian Republic, Italy adopted the Constitution in 1948 that guaranteed the freedom of religion and the separation of church and state. And these principles were somewhat inconsistent with the 1929 Concordat, which, as I said, had made Catholicism the state religion. For many decades after 1948, both Italy and the Holy See recognized the need to update the Concordat. These negotiations were begun under Pope Paul VI, and they finally reached a final point under Pope John Paul II and Prime Minister Bettino Craxi, and that led to the agreement in 1984. So, with this 1984 Villa Madama agreement, both the Italian state and the Holy See reaffirmed their mutual independence and sovereignty, keeping that part of the Lateran Pacts unchanged, so the Church could still carry out its spiritual mission freely, and the state maintained full secular authority. The Church was also free to organize itself through appointments, seminaries, religious orders, without state interference. Another of the 1984 agreement's changes regarded the marriage law reforms, and so civil recognition of the canon law marriages continued, but annulments by the church tribunals now required confirmation by Italian civil courts in order to have legal effect. So an annulment was no longer enough for recognition by the Italian civil society that a divorce or that a separation had taken effect. Note that there is a difference between annulment and divorce. Divorce is the separation, the civil separation of two people. The annulment by the church is not a divorce. It's not a kind of Catholic divorce, but an annulment is a recognition that the marriage never actually took place, based on one of 26 different aspects in canon law that are that render a marriage null and void, which meaning that it never actually took place despite the external trappings. Then another aspect of the 1984 Villa Madama agreement was that religious instruction in public schools remained optional, and it's still an option today, but it was no longer mandatory, so students still today can receive courses in their primary and secondary education in religion, but they have the option to opt out of it. At the same time, a new funding system replaced the direct state subsidies, as in the state stopped paying directly for church events and church-related expenses, and it instituted what is known as the 8 per mille, or the 8 per 1,000 system. This is basically a new funding system in which Italian taxpayers could elect to allocate 0.8% of their income tax either to the Catholic Church or to another recognized religious denomination, or at the same time to the state for social purposes if they see fit. This system remains in place today, and any Italian taxpayer knows that they have the option to grant this 0.8% of their income tax that's been assessed by the state to the Catholic Church, or to there are several others, Protestant churches or other religious denominations that have state recognition in Italy. And at the same time, the 1984 Villa Madama agreement clarified the tax treatment of ecclesiastical properties and activities, distinguishing between religious and commercial uses. So properties that are used for worship, such as parishes or seminaries, or for pastoral activity, they remain exempt from certain taxes, although any commercial enterprises carried on by the same parishes, not for fundraising but for lucrative gain, and for profit, were treated like any other business and taxed according to the Italian system. And so some of the results of the 1984 updating of the agreement between Italy and the Holy See, it really modernized the church and state relations and brought the framework into harmony with Italy's republican constitution and democratic principles, changes that had taken place since 1929. It also preserved and reaffirmed the Vatican sovereignty and strengthened religious pluralism and opened the door for freedom of religion, fully recognized by the Church, and for similar agreements with other faiths. So since Catholicism was no longer the state religion according to the Lateran Pacts, Italy was free to recognize other agreements with other religious faiths, such as the Waldensians, the Jews, and with Lutherans. And these followed later in the 1980s and 1990s. It also became a way to stabilize the Church's finances. This giving of the 0.8% of income tax, this mechanism became a lasting financial bridge between the Italian people and the Catholic Church, and still subsidizes the Church's activities through voluntary giving to the Church. It also marked a symbolic shift of the Church's evolution from a privileged state religion to a respected but equal spiritual presence in a secular republic. Pope Leo XIV is still meeting with Italian President Sergio Mattarella in the Bronzino Room as their respective delegations take part in bilateral talks to strengthen these deep relationships that we've been talking about between the Italian state and the Holy See, the central governing body of the Catholic Church. As I had mentioned, the Villa Madama agreement that updated the Lateran Pacts brought more clarity to the relationship between Italy and the Holy See, and this was done under Pope John Paul II, known as the Polish Pope, and he became friends over the years with three Italian presidents who were in their roles during his papacy. The first was Sandro Pertini, the president from 1978 to 1985. You could almost call this, there's a friendship of opposites. At the time when John Paul II was elected in October 1978, Italy was itself in political turmoil and moral uncertainty. They're known as the Years of Lead. And the President Sandro Pertini, who was a socialist, staunchly secular, seemed but an unlikely friend for the conservative Polish Pope. Yet the two shared a deep human bond, despite John Paul II's own experience with communism and socialism in Poland. And we see Pope Leo and President Mattarella come out of the Bronzino room to greet other members of their delegations. They are currently going to the Lille Tapestry Room, where there will be an exchange, official exchange of gifts. You'll notice that on the right of the screen are the corazzieri, who are extremely tall. That one of the requirements to be a corazziere is to be over 2 meters tall, I believe. I'm not exactly sure, but they have to be very tall in stature. And that's just one of the characteristics of the president's personal guard. It wasn't long ago that President Mattarella made a visit to Pope Leo after his election.
The meeting between Mattarella and Pope Leo took place on June 6th. They had actually met once before in St. Peter's Basilica after the Mass that inaugurated Pope Leo's pontificate, and then the first official meeting took place in the Apostolic Palace. Sergio Mattarella the president was accompanied by his daughter, his children and grandchildren, and also a delegation which included the Foreign Minister Tajani, and they had a private conversation that lasted a little bit less than an hour, and there were also some discussions in the Secretariat of State. On the day that Pope Leo was elected, on May 8th, the President Sergio Mattarella had also expressed his fervent good wishes and emphasized the value of an unarmed and disarmed peace, which the Pope was one of the first few messages that the Pope had expressed right after his election. And the president had written in his message that at this historic moment when so much of the world is ravaged by conflict, and where it is above all the innocent who suffer the harshest consequences of such barbarity, he wished to assure the Pope of Italy's commitment to pursuing strong relations with the Holy See and to continue promoting a vision of the world and of coexistence amongst people, founded on peace and on the guarantee of inviolable rights and the dignity and freedom of all people. So he had wished the Pope good wishes right after his election.
President Mattarella, as we mentioned earlier, met with Pope Francis a couple of times, and he visited, besides the Pope visiting the Quirinal Palace, the President Mattarella also visited the Vatican several times. His first official visit came on April 18th, 2015, and it was followed on June 10th, 2017, which is when Pope Francis returned to the Quirinal Palace. At this part of that visit, of Pope Francis' 2017 visit to the Quirinal, was a meeting with around 200 elementary and middle school students from earthquake-stricken areas of Lazio, Umbria, Abruzzo, Marche, and Emilia-Romagna regions, following a devastating earthquake that leveled several cities and small towns. Pope Francis and President Mattarella also met in February 2020 in the southern Italian city of Bari for the Mediterranean Frontier of Peace meeting that brought together ecumenical leaders and interreligious leaders to speak about peace, and especially about the migration crisis and the thousands of people who die each year in the Mediterranean Sea. President Mattarella also visited the Vatican on December 16th, 2021, when he held another audience with Pope Francis, and this marked the end of his first term as president. He visited at the time with his children, his grandchildren, and his entire staff. It was a farewell visit, but as the history books note, it was just a short, brief period before President Mattarella was re-elected as president of the Italian Republic. After that, he returned to the Vatican on May 29th, 2023, where he met in the Clementine Hall when he was awarded the Paul VI Prize by the Pope. And so during that visit on May 29th, 2023, Pope Francis awarded President Mattarella with the Paul VI International Prize. And a little bit about that prize. It was established in 1979 by the Paul VI Institute in Brescia, Italy, in memory of Paul VI, who was born Giovanni Battista Montini. The goal and the aim of that prize is to honor individuals or institutions who, with their studies and works, have contributed to the growth of the religious meaning in the world. Besides President Mattarella, the other recipients have included theologians, philosophers, artists, and religious institutions. Among these were noted Catholic theologians Hans Urs von Balthasar in 1983 and Jean Vanier in 1997. This award was given to President Mattarella on the liturgical memorial of St. Paul VI. It was held in the Clementine Hall, and typically this award, the Paul VI Award, is given by the Institute, but Pope Francis himself personally conferred this award on President Mattarella, which also underscored its importance. At that event, that conferral of the Paul VI Prize to President Mattarella, Pope Francis linked that award to key virtues and ideas, and he drew on Paul VI's vision. Pope Francis spoke of the politics as one of the highest forms of charity, and he emphasized that people in public office should see themselves as servants of their fellow citizens, not lords over them. This also draws on the ancient title that is the popes have used for themselves, which is the servant of servants, not overlords, but as Pope Gregory the Great called himself, the servant of the servants of God. And Pope Francis praised President Mattarella's sense of service and responsibility, and he noted how he had interrupted his anticipated retirement to accept another term in the name of duty. President Mattarella was supposed to have retired after his first term, but in an unusual, perhaps not unprecedented, but an unusual decision, the Italian government decided to re-elect him for a second term. In his speech, Pope Francis also invoked the themes of legality, civic responsibility, personal integrity, and the need in democracies for witness over mere words. The scientific committee of the Paul VI Institute, in the decision to confer this award on President Mattarella in 2023, justified their choice by highlighting his political life and how it embodied a commitment to the common good, which was interpreted as a noble meaning in the tradition of Paul VI's thought. As he accepted the award, President Mattarella chose to donate the monetary portion of the prize to communities in need. Among these was shelters that were affected by floods in the Romagna region. He also reflected that his receiving the prize, named after Paul VI, carried personal significance for him. Paul VI had been Pope during President Mattarella's youth and also influenced his own development as a Catholic engaged in public life. We see Pope Leo emerging from this last round of talks. The Holy Father and the President are currently in the room of the mirrors, the Hall of Mirrors, presenting their delegations once again. and the President have visited the Chapel of the Annunciation. It was not shown on television, on our screens, but they met Monsignor Sergio Sidi, the chaplain of the Quirinal Palace, and Father Santiago Alonso, who is the chaplain of the Tenuta of Castelporziano. And we hear the presentation of Pope Leo and President Mattarella as they enter the Sala delle Feste. At this point, they will be presented and then give speeches to one another's delegations.
Now we see Pope Leo XIV and Sergio Mattarella who are preparing for their speeches. Most Blessed Father, it is a privilege and a deeply moving occasion to welcome you to the Quirinal Palace, a building that bears witness to an important part of the history of the papacy and of Italy, and which the Republic safeguards as the home of all Italians.
Il legame imprescindibile tra Santa Sede e Italia.
Today's ceremony is meant to once again affirm the unbreakable bond between the Holy See and Italy and represents a gesture of homage towards you from the whole of Italy, on whose behalf, along with the institutions of the Republic present here, I wish to express heartfelt good wishes for the High Magisterium entrusted to you by the Conclave.
Il popolo italiano si è stretto nel cordoglio per la scomparsa di Papa Francesco.
This past April, the Italian people mourned the passing of Pope Francis, who left an indelible memory in everyone, believers and non-believers alike. At the same time, from the day of your election, Your Holiness has witnessed the widespread outpouring of closeness from the Italian people, who recognize in your actions, in defense of the centrality of the human person, of peace and of dialogue, values that are both shared and foundational, and which are also lie at the heart of our Constitution.
Sono in gran numero le persone di buona volontà in Italia e all'estero.
In this holy year dedicated to hope, many people of goodwill in Italy and abroad look to the moral authority of the Holy See, finding in its actions and in its tireless commitment to the whole of humanity reasons to keep hope alive.
If
you're just joining us, we are hearing President Sergio Mattarella address Pope Leo and his delegation, providing an English translation. We are living through times of great difficulty. After the Second World War, the world set its sights on a multilateral system to build on dialogue to resolve conflicts. This system today seems increasingly set aside. The institutions born in that era appear weakened, at times irresponsibly and deliberately delegitimized, and unable to influence today's crises with the necessary effectiveness. There is a growing concern over the erosion of mechanisms that build trust between states. In such a scenario, the logic of the strongest, the temptation to resort to arms to settle disputes, seems at times to prevail. The dignity and rights of individuals, groups, and peoples are often trampled upon. Russia's large-scale aggression against Ukraine, now almost 4 years on, continues to claim countless civilian victims, to sow death and destruction, and casts a troubling shadow of insecurity across the entire European continent. In the Middle East, the appalling wound of the terrorist attack of October 7th, 2023 was followed by a response that not only exceeded the criteria of proportionality, but also crossed the boundaries of humanity. Today, there is a spark of hope, as Your Holiness has emphasized, that must be supported with conviction. The release of the surviving hostages is of great importance and touches the hearts of those who care for civilization and human dignity, with a thought for those who have died in that cruel condition of captivity.
The ceasefire in Gaza makes it possible to begin addressing the suffering of a civilian population so terribly afflicted. We hope that the ongoing negotiations on the next steps will reach a positive conclusion and lead, as soon as possible, to a definitive end to hostilities and violence in the Strip, to the benefit of the overall stability of the Middle East and the holy sites, and to revive the two-state solution, the only path capable of ensuring a future in which both Israel and Palestine can enjoy peace and security. I would like to reaffirm that true, lasting peace resides in the hearts of peoples. Otherwise, under the ashes of an end to violence, resentment smolders, ready to erupt again at the first exploitable opportunity, when one realizes that the end of violence has unfortunately become just a pause between two eruptions. Ukraine and the Middle East are only two of the major theaters of war, those closest to us. The number of ongoing conflicts and humanitarian crises is sadly much higher, as Your Holiness has often reminded us. Indeed, faced with such brutality, a risk we cannot underestimate is that alongside the many who feel called to work for peace, part of public opinion may become numb, that the suffering of millions no longer stirs the conscience. We do not aspire merely to a halt in the violence. We cannot feel satisfied with that. We aspire to a condition in which peoples can resume a stable path toward peace and cooperation in global life.
In a world where peaceful coexistence is so endangered, it is always the most vulnerable who suffer the most, especially children and young people. It is unacceptable to steal the future from entire generations. Often, Christian communities pay a heavy price in wars, targeted for the role of stability and moderation that they have traditionally exercised, especially in the Near East. It is a deeply troubling picture, Your Holiness, one that clashes with the aspirations of citizens in every nation. Its repercussions are felt even in our own societies, which face frequent phenomena of polarization, extremism, and marginalization of the poor and disadvantaged. Old and new forms of poverty clash with increasingly excessive wealth. Your Holiness is stirring appeals regarding the poverty of the many, the result of internal injustices and global imbalances, deeply challenge our consciences So too does the need to develop a new humanism in the face of the many challenges of artificial intelligence and your constant call to seek true paths of reconciliation. These are clear and compelling points of reference aimed at building human societies where the respect for everyone's rights, the balancing of inequalities, and equal opportunities are the foundation for the pursuit of the common good.
L'esprimo, Santità, la riconoscenza più alta per l'insegnamento e l'orizzonte.
I express, Your Holiness, my deepest gratitude for the teaching and vision offered in the Lexite, the apostolic exhortation published in recent days, which calls for the essential transformation of our way of thinking. We do not want to resign ourselves to the prospect of a society dominated by oligarchs, or rather by the privileged, based on wealth, ruthlessness, or indifference towards others. A society that emerges by raising the values of equality, solidarity, and freedom. Alongside this, in contrast to so many generous initiatives, even here in Italy, we also witness phenomena often driven by fear of the unknown, by withdrawal in the face of global structural processes that are transforming our realities. Climate change, migration, and the very use of new technologies. These are processes that would instead require, in international life, a determined renewal of the values of coexistence and dialogue. Values that would allow these phenomena to be managed in an orderly and cooperative spirit, with the commitment to leave no one behind, thus preserving human dignity and society's well-being.
Di grande significato proviene dall'Europa e dalla sua storica svolta che ha visto popoli che erano.
A significant example comes from Europe and its historic turning point, which saw peoples who had long fought bitterly against each other unite around the principles of peace and cooperation for a shared future. A core of values that for the founding fathers, many of whom had a Christian background, found inspiration in the respect for the dignity of each person, for solidarity and justice, and which form the soul of our democracies, understood not merely as adherence to rules of the game, but in their deeper essence as a guarantee of freedom, equality, and participation. These are all antidotes to irreconcilable conflict, to every form of division and war.
Nel suo storico messaggio del Natale 1944,
as Pius XII recalled in his historic Christmas message of 1944, democratic order includes the unity of the human race, and, as he said, on this principle depends the future of peace. It is a call to forever renounce war as a means of resolving disputes. This call, through the teachings of the popes from then until today, finds in Your Holiness a new and tireless messenger, as shown by your very first message from the Loggia of Blessings. This peace, as you emphasized, begins with each of us, and that is why it is so essential to unarm our hearts and disarm our words. This and particular responsibility falls upon political leaders and all those who influence public opinion to reject the glorification of conflict and instead foster dialogue and mutual understanding.
Your Holiness, in an international context marked by troubling displays of contempt for the rule of law, it is significant that the relationship between the Republic and the Church in Italy is based on a framework of mutually respected and shared rules. the Lateran Pacts, which in 1929 brought an end to the so-called Roman question, and which were incorporated into the Republican Constitution by the Constituent Assembly in 1947, along with the Agreement of 1984, fully aligned the treaty framework with the provisions of Italy's constitution and the developments promoted by the Church through the Second Vatican Council. The new agreement reflects a mature and balanced view of relations between the state and the Catholic Church, affirming full freedom of religion and conscience, a condition that allows each person to express their dignity, and with it their vocation to autonomy and responsibility.
La cornice pattizia invera ancora oggi la fruttuosa alleanza.
This treaty framework continues to embody the fruitful alliance between the Catholic Church and the Italian state, each within its own sphere, independent and sovereign, yet united in the common goal of protecting and promoting the common good. The strength of the relationship with the Catholic Church has meant, and I wish to emphasize this on this occasion, a reinforcement of the vital and indivisible heritage of national unity, strengthening the cohesion of the Italian people, and contributing to an awareness of the responsibility each individual bears toward the community in which they live. The Catholic Church has played and continues to play an admirable role in supporting the most vulnerable sectors of the population. For this, we are profoundly grateful. We witness this commitment every day in the promotion of high-value social work, in the welcoming of migrants, and in the commitment to legality. Most blessed Father, thank you for your visit. I am confident that I express the unanimous sentiment of all, as I offer support and solidarity for your mission in such a difficult and troubled international context. I extend my most sincere wishes on behalf of all Italians and personally for a fruitful pontificate and for the spiritual and personal well-being of your Holiness. That was Sergio Mattarella, Italy's president, giving his speech in his meeting with the Pope.
And now Pope Leo XIV comes to the podium, takes his speech, and prepares to deliver it in Italian.
La ringrazio per le gentili parole che mi ha indirizzato e per l'invito a venire qui al Quirinale, palazzo a cui tanto sono legate la storia della Chiesa Cattolica e la memoria di numerosi pontefici.
Mr. President, I thank you for the kind words you have addressed to me and for the invitation to come here to the Quirinal, a palace so deeply linked to the history of the Catholic Church and to the memory of numerous pontiffs. As Bishop of Rome and Primate of Italy, it is meaningful for me to renew through this visit the strong bond that unites the See of Peter with the Italian people, whom you represent, within the framework of the cordial bilateral relations that exist between Italy and the Holy See, which have long been marked by sincere friendship and fruitful mutual collaboration. Indeed, this happy union has its roots in the history of this peninsula and in the long religious and cultural traditions of this country. We see its signs, for example, in the countless churches and bell towers that dot the land, often true treasures of art and devotion, in which the innate creativity of this people, united with their genuine and steadfast faith, has handed down to us a testimony of great beauty, artistic, certainly, but above all, moral and human. I take this opportunity to express the Holy See's deep gratitude for all that the Italian authorities have done and continue to do on the occasion of various demanding ecclesial events centered in Rome and resonating throughout the world.
Mi preme in particolare manifestare riconoscenza per lo sforzo profuso a vari livelli.
I particularly wish to express my appreciation for the effort made at all levels during the death of my venerated predecessor, Pope Francis. It was here at the Quirinal Palace that he said, "My roots are in this country." His love for the land and the people of Italy found, in those days, a moving and heartfelt response, which was also evident in the great and prudent care taken during the subsequent conclave for the election of the new pontiff.
Ancora voglio dire un sentito grazie a lei, signor Presidente.
Once again, I offer heartfelt thanks to you, Mr. President, and to the entire nation for the beautiful witness of hospitality and organizational efficiency that Italy has shown for months during the Jubilee year.
Sotto diversi aspetti. Logistica.
Through logistics, security, infrastructure, services, and much more.
E molto altro. Aprendo le sue braccia e mostrando il suo volto,
opening its arms and showing its welcoming face to the many pilgrims who come here from every part of the world.
La Chiesa universale sta celebrando il Giubileo della Speranza.
The Universal Church is celebrating the Jubilee of Hope. Pope Francis, in the bull Spes non confundit, by which he proclaimed it in May 2024, emphasized the importance of paying attention to the great good that is present in the world, so as to not fall into the temptation of believing ourselves overwhelmed by evil and violence. I believe that the beautiful synergy and cooperation we are now experiencing constitute in themselves a sign of hope for all those who come in faith to cross the holy door and to pray at the tombs of Peter and the Apostles.
In a few years, we will celebrate the centenary of the Lateran Pacts. It seems all the more fitting, therefore, to reaffirm the importance of the mutual distinction of spheres, from which, in a climate of cordial respect, the Catholic Church and the Italian state collaborate for the common good, at the service of the human person, whose inviolable dignity must always remain at the forefront of decision-making and action at all levels of social development, especially in defending the most fragile and needy. To that end, I commend and encourage our mutual commitment to ensure that every collaboration continues to be guided by and in full respect of the 1984 Concordat. As is sadly evident, we live in a time that, alongside many signs of hope, is marked by grave suffering that wounds humanity worldwide and demands urgent yet far-sighted responses.
Il primo impegno che in proposito desidero richiamare è quello per la pace.
The first commitment I wish to recall in this regard is that for peace. Numerous wars have devastated our planet, and as we look at the images, read the news, hear the voices, and meet the people painfully affected The words of my predecessors resound with prophetic force. How can we not recall the unheeded but unmistakable warning of Benedict XV during the First World War, and on the eve of the Second World War, that of the Venerable Pius XII? Let us look at the faces of those crushed by the irrational ferocity of those who mercilessly plan death and destruction. Let us listen to their cry and remember with St. John the 23rd that every human being is a person, that is, a nature endowed with intelligence and free will, and therefore is the subject of rights and duties that flow immediately and simultaneously from his very nature. Rights and duties which are thus universal, inviolable, and inalienable. I therefore renew my heartfelt appeal that we continue to work to re-establish peace in every part of the world, and that the principles of justice, equity, and cooperation among peoples, principles which form its irreplaceable foundation, be ever more cultivated and promoted.
In favore di tante situazioni di disagio legate alla guerra e alla miseria.
In this regard, I express my appreciation for the Italian government's commitment to alleviating situations of hardship caused by war and poverty, particularly its efforts on behalf of the children of Gaza, also in collaboration with the Bambino Gesù Hospital. These are strong and effective contributions to building a dignified, peaceful, and prosperous coexistence for all members of the human family. To that same end, the shared commitment that the Italian state and the Holy See have always shown in favor of multilateralism remains most valuable. It is an essential value. The complex challenges of our time make it more necessary than ever to seek and adopt shared solutions. It is therefore indispensable to strengthen its dynamics and processes, recalling its original objectives, to resolve conflicts and to foster development, while promoting transparent language and avoiding ambiguities that can lead to division.
Ci prepariamo a celebrare nell'anno a venire un importante anniversario.
Next year, we will celebrate an important anniversary, the 8th centenary of the death of Saint Francis of Assisi, patron of Italy, on October 3rd, 1226. This offers an opportunity to highlight the urgent issue of caring for our common home. Saint Francis taught us to praise the Creator through respect for all creatures, proclaiming his message from the geographical heart of the peninsula and transmitting it through the beauty of his writings and the witness of his life and that of his brothers across the generations down to us. For this reason, I believe Italy has received in a special way the mission of transmitting to the nations a culture that recognizes the earth as a sister with whom we share our life, and a beautiful mother who opens her arms to embrace us.
Negli ultimi decenni assistiamo in Europa, come sappiamo, al fenomeno di un notevole calo della natalità.
In recent decades, we have witnessed in Europe, as we have seen, a notable decline in the birth rate. This calls for a concerted effort to promote choices at all levels in favor of the family, supporting its efforts, promoting its values, and protecting its needs and rights. Father, mother, son, daughter, grandfather, grandmother. These are words that in Italian tradition naturally express and evoke sentiments of love, respect, and dedication, sometimes heroic, for the good of the family community, and therefore for that of society as a whole. In particular, I wish to emphasize the importance of guaranteeing all families the indispensable support of dignified work in fair conditions and with due respect and with due attention to the needs related to motherhood and fatherhood. Let us do everything possible to give confidence to families, especially young families, so that they may look to the future with serenity and grow in harmony. In this context, it is essential at every level to uphold and protect life in all its phases, from conception to old age until the moment of death. I hope this sensitivity will continue to grow, especially including with regard to the accessibility of medical care and medicines according to each person's needs.
Che l'Italia offre con grande generosità ai migranti.
I express gratitude for the generous assistance this country offers to migrants who increasingly knock at its doors, as well as for its efforts in combating human trafficking. These are among the great challenges of our time, and Italy has never turned away from them. I encourage you to keep alive your attitude of openness and solidarity. At the same time, I wish to emphasize the importance of constructive integration of newcomers into the values and traditions of Italian society, so that the mutual gift realized in this encounter of peoples may truly enrich and benefit all.
In
this regard, I stress how precious it is for everyone to love and share their own history and culture with its signs and expressions. The more one serenely recognizes and loves who one is, the easier it is to encounter and integrate the other, without fear and with an open heart.
In proposito, c'è una certa tendenza in questi tempi a non apprezzare.
In our time, there is a tendency at various levels not to sufficiently appreciate the models and values developed over the centuries that shape our cultural identity, and sometimes even to attempt to erase their historical and human significance. Let us not disdain what our forebears lived and handed down to us, often at great cost. Let us not be seduced by homogenizing and fluid models that promote only the appearance of freedom, while in fact rendering people dependent on new forms of control, whether fashions of the moment, commercial strategies, or otherwise. Cherish the memory of those who came before us, and to treasure the traditions that have made us who we are is essential for facing the present and the future with awareness, serenity, responsibility, and perspective. Mr. President, to you and through you to all the Italian people, I wish to express in conclusion my warmest good wishes. Italy is a country of immense richness, often humble and hidden, and for that very reason, sometimes in need of being discovered and rediscovered. I encourage all Italians to undertake this beautiful adventure in order to draw from it hope and to face with confidence the challenges of the present and the future. Thank you.
That was Pope Leo XIV giving his speech right after Italian President Sergio Mattarella had given his in front of their respective delegations and other members of Italian institutions.
As we hear the applause, we notice that there is a standing ovation for the Pope's speech. The Pope and the President come forward to the front of the stage to pause for a moment for photos in front of the flags arrayed behind them. And now they are leaving this meeting room, where they will pass by the Corazzieri room and make a brief visit to the Pauline Chapel and pass through Paul VI's oratory passage and stop at the balcony. We see once again the facade, the bell tower of the Quirinal Palace. So in his speech, Pope Leo praised the close collaboration of Italy and the Holy See, and especially in their work together to facilitate recent church events that have enjoyed a global audience. Pope Leo called himself, among his many titles, he used the titles of Bishop of Rome and Primate of Italy. And in his speech he said, "As Bishop of Rome and Primate of Italy, it is meaningful for me to renew through this visit the strong bond that unites the See of Peter with the Italian people whom you represent," he said to the Italian president. The Pope said the history of Italy and the Catholic Church have been intertwined for many centuries, and this, he said, is seen in the countless churches and bell towers to which Italian artistic and cultural creativity have given birth. He called these physical creations an expression of the innate creativity of this people, united with their genuine and steadfast faith, which has handed down to us a testimony of great beauty. Artistic, certainly, he said, but above all moral and human. Pope Leo XIV thanked the Italian civil authorities for their efforts also to welcome the millions of pilgrims who have come to celebrate the Jubilee Year of Hope and to pay their respects to Pope Francis after his death and to witness the conclave, major events that took place earlier this year. The logistics and security put in place during these events bore a beautiful witness of hospitality and organizational efficiency to Italy's desire to welcome peoples from every part of the world, said the Pope. He then recalled the upcoming centenary of the Lateran Pacts, which we spoke about at length earlier, and which, he noted, were signed in 1929 and carved Vatican City-State out of what had been Italian territory since 1870. The Church and Italian state work closely together to advance the common good, he said, and noted their work in service of the human person, whose inviolable dignity, he said, must always remain at the forefront of decision-making and action at all levels of social development, especially in defending the most fragile and needy. Pope Leo then went on to recall the grave suffering that wounds humanity worldwide, and which he said demands urgent yet far-sighted responses. Peace, said the Pope, is an essential element of the Church's desire for the world, and he lamented the numerous wars that are devastating the planet. The Pope also recalled the words of several of his predecessors who appealed to global leaders as the world hovered on the brink of war at various times, including Pope Benedict XV, the head of the First World War, and Pope Pius XII, the head of the Second World War. Then, with Pope St. Paul VI, Pope Leo XIV said he renewed his heartfelt appeal that we continue to work to reestablish peace in every part of the world, and that the principles of justice, equity, and cooperation among peoples, principles which form its irreplaceable foundation, may be ever more cultivated and promoted in society. Among the many efforts of the Italian state, Pope Leo thanked the Italian government for its work to alleviate situations of hardship caused by war and poverty. He especially noted its efforts to allow Gazan children to receive treatment at the Vatican's Bambino Gesù Hospital, as well as other Italian hospitals spread throughout the country. Pope Leo also noted the decline in the birth rate in Europe over the past decades. He said that this calls for a concerted effort to promote choices at all levels in favor of the family. The Pope invited Italy to support the efforts of families and promote family values and their needs and rights. He noted that family relationships are very important in Italian society and culture, and noting the words father, mother, son, daughter, grandfather, grandmother are all very words that are full of natural sentiment of love and respect and dedication. The Pope also expressed his called for the importance of guaranteeing that all families may receive indispensable support of dignified work, and that all may work in fair conditions and with due attention to the needs related to motherhood and fatherhood. Let us do everything possible to give confidence to families, especially young families, said the Pope, so that they may look to the future with serenity and grow in harmony. At the same time, Pope Leo also thanked and invited Italy to offer generous welcome to migrants who are increasingly knocking at its doors. Italy, he said, has never turned away from them, and I encourage you to keep alive your attitude of openness and solidarity. I wish to emphasize the importance of constructive integration of newcomers into the values and traditions of Italian society. He said, so that the mutual gift realized in this encounter of peoples may truly enrich and benefit all. If you're following on the screen, we see the troops in the courtyard awaiting the arrival of the Pope and the President, and we see the delegations exiting the rooms. On screen we see Cardinal Matteo Maria Zuppi, who is the Archbishop of Bologna and President of the Italian Bishops' Conference.
As a reminder, this is also the third time that Pope Leo the 14th meets with Italian President Sergio Mattarella, the first having been on the 18th of May when the Pope celebrated his inauguration Mass for his pontificate. They met briefly in St. Peter's Basilica at the end of the liturgy, and then Sergio Mattarella had visited the Pope at the Vatican on the 6th of June.
We see on the screen drone footage of beautiful images of the city of Rome and the rooftops above and beyond the Quirinal Palace here in the heart of Rome. You can see the various papal elements that are tied there, including the basilicas and the many churches that Pope Leo mentioned that dot the Italian countryside and fill this city. Speaking of churches, we recall that Rome has many churches. Among, I believe, I heard a datum one time that there were around 400 churches in Rome, and we note that the cardinals each have a titular church here in the city of Rome. Following the recent election of the Pope, we've all gotten a kind of a history lesson in how popes are elected and the makeup of the cardinalate. So as each cardinal is, when they are created, the Pope gives them a titular church in Rome, and so they have a home in Rome because the Pope has always been elected, traditionally been elected as by the clergy of Rome, and so the cardinals for the last several centuries have made up that clergy. So upon their appointment, they are given a church, of which they call their home in Rome, and so each has their titular church among these 400 here in the city. We see the Vatican delegation standing in front of the palace, waiting for the Pope and the President to come out, following their visit to the Pauline Chapel here in the Quirinal Palace. In his speech, the President of Italy, Sergio Mattarella, greeted the Holy Father and recalled the the unbreakable bond between the Holy See and Italy, and which he said represents a gesture of homage towards you from the whole of Italy. That was the point of this ceremony, he said, and this visit, to express the Italian people's love for the Pope and to express the President's heartfelt good wishes for his magisterium and for the task that was entrusted to him at the conclave on May 8th of this year. The Italian President also noted the many difficulties that face the world today, the wars and conflict and violence, and the stresses on the multilateral system, he said, that are built on dialogue to resolve conflicts. The President noted that these systems of multilateralism seem increasingly set aside. The institutions born in the era following the Second World War, he said, appear weakened, at times irresponsibly and deliberately legitimized, he said, and unable to influence today's crises with the necessary effectiveness. The President had expressed a growing concern over the erosion of mechanisms that build trust between states. The Italian President picked up on two of the conflicts which he said are closest to Italy and have the most direct effect, which are Russia's large-scale aggression in Ukraine and the conflict in the Middle East, which was just had a ceasefire was reached over the weekend. Today there is a spark of hope, said the President, that must be supported with conviction. The release of the surviving hostages, the Israeli hostages who have been held at the hands of Hamas in Gaza since October 7th, 2023. The President said this release of the surviving hostages is of great importance and touches the hearts of all those who care for civilization and human dignity. And this ceasefire in Gaza makes it possible to begin addressing the suffering of a civilian population that is so terribly afflicted. Continuing on the topic of peace, President Mattarella said that true lasting peace resides in the hearts of peoples. Otherwise, he said, under the ashes of an end to violence, resentment smolders, ready to erupt again at the first exploitable opportunity, when one realizes that the end of violence has unfortunately become just a pause between two eruptions. President Mattarella said that the peoples do not aspire merely to a halt in violence, but instead to a condition where they can resume a stable path forward toward peace and cooperation. We see the bell tower still of the Quirinal Palace as Pope Leo XIV and President Mattarella are concluding their bilateral meetings following their public speeches to their respective delegations. In his speech, President Mattarella also recalled, as did Pope Leo, the Lateran Pacts of 1929, noting that they brought an end to what at the time was called the Roman question, the question of how the Italian state and the Catholic Church should interact at their highest levels and how that should be resolved, and that was resolved through the Lateran Pacts. He said these pacts, along with the Villa Madama agreement of 1984, reflected the mature and balanced view of relations between the state and the Catholic Church, affirming full freedom of religion and conscience, a condition, he said, that allows the person to express their dignity and with it their vocation to autonomy and responsibility. This treaty framework, said President Mattarella, continues to embody the fruitful alliance between the Catholic Church and the Italian state, each, he said, within its own sphere, independent and sovereign, quoting the Lateran Pacts, yet, he added, united in the common goal of protecting the common good. President Mattarella also said this meeting with Pope Leo offered an occasion to reinforce the vital and indivisible heritage of national unity, strengthening the cohesion of the Italian people and contributing to an awareness of the responsibility each individual bears toward the community in which they live. The Catholic Church has played and continues to play, he said, an admirable role in supporting the most vulnerable sectors of the population, and for this we are profoundly grateful. We witness this commitment every day in the promotion of high-value social work, in the welcoming of migrants, and in the commitment to legality. And those were just a summary of a few of the points of President Mattarella's speech during this meeting with Pope Leo. And we see the Holy Father's car brought up to the front of the courtyard of the Quirinal Palace, awaiting the Holy Father's exit. See a few people coming out, journalists and others who have been covering this event here in the Quirinal Palace. The Vatican photographers and media professionals, and Pope Leo and President Mattarella. Pause once again on the red carpet to receive the honors and salutes of the Italian troops. Vatican anthem played.
And now followed by the Italian anthem.
Now Pope Leo and President Mattarella offer each other their final greetings as the Pope's sedan is brought forward so that he may return to the Vatican. Holy Father is getting into his sedan, a Jeep Grand Cherokee, and accompanied by the Vatican gendarmes for the return, accompanied back to the Vatican city-state. And with that, we conclude this live broadcast of Pope Leo XIV's visit to the Italian President, Sergio Mattarella, at the Quirinal Palace this Tuesday, October 14th. Please visit the Vatican News web portal, Facebook, Instagram, X, and YouTube accounts for coverage of today's event, as well as other Vatican and world news. On behalf of Vatican Media and the Dicastery for Communication, I would like to thank our in-studio audio technician, Alberto Giovanetti, and our audio coordinator, Father Felipe Herrera, and all of our media partners who have made this broadcast possible, as well as all of you for joining us. A blessed Sunday, a blessed day to you all. Laudetur Jesus Christus, praised be Jesus Christ.